And now we're getting into the fun, messy process side of this all with the Scotland lore part 2, why I moved to Scotland from the US. Hopefully you've listened to last week's episode, part 1. Otherwise, you're going to be missing a lot of context for this episode. So if you haven't listened to part 1, pause this, go listen to that, and then come back. With that being said, let's get into it. Being creative, different, and bold aren't bad for business. They're the game changer. And if you want to grow your business by leaning into these exact things, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Hayley David of Money Rebel, and you're listening to the Bad for Business podcast. Now let's dive into the episode. It's just showing you the real picture and the real life shit of this is what it actually looks like when we're in the process of trying to accomplish something. Like sometimes it's messy. And that's why I really want to talk about the move process briefly, like from when I decided I was going for 6 months to actually landing there. This story would be pretty boring if I was just like, oh, I wanted to move to Scotland and woo, I did it. And I just told you the highlight reel of, oh, I made it and everything was amazing and the trip went well. Yeah, sure. Some of you might be like, oh, yay, Hayley, like I'm so happy for you, but you're not going to be able to connect with them. And it's leaving out so much. I just want to keep it absolutely real and show you like the real life shit that comes with going after these big goals or going through changes and transition, pivots, iterations, whatever it is, show you the reality that sometimes it's a little bit messy when you're in the process of making it happen. I want to keep it real by sharing that at times it was really messy and I didn't think it was going to happen at all. And I wanted to give up. And there were so many hurdles that I had to overcome. And I feel like that's just as important to share as like the fun stuff about getting to Scotland, all that. So once I made the decision to go visit Edinburgh for 6 months, I decided to sublease my apartment. If I was only going to visit for a month or a few, I would have kept it. But for 6 months, I was like, nope, I'm going to sublease my apartment. And I think it was like May 1st when I decided that. So I had to try and find someone to sublease my apartment before I left in July. And when you sublease an apartment, if you're not familiar with it, like you have to find the person who takes over your lease. And I do believe this was also a God thing because when I went down to the leasing office and I talked to the leasing manager about what I wanted to do, she was so helpful. Mandy is her name. I know she doesn't work there anymore, but shout out to you, Mandy, because you helped make this possible. She actually found the person who took over my lease. That was such a weight off of my shoulders, knowing that, okay, I've got one of the things done that I needed to do in order to go for 6 months. The only slight problem being they wanted to move in at the end of May. So that means I literally packed all of my belongings into a storage unit in Nashville and said goodbye to my perfect apartment, all within 30 days of deciding to go to Edinburgh for 6 months. But like I said, we were accomplishing some of the steps, part of the process of actually getting there. Subleasing my apartment was one of those big pieces of the moving process. And the other biggest hurdle to moving was getting Howard over there. The UK is a rabies-free country, and they also don't allow pets to fly into the country in the cabin. They have to fly in the hold most of the time if they're a pet. So in order for Howard to come with me, I had to find a specialized vet. It was very expensive to do this entire process, and it was very time-oriented, step by step. They needed a rabies vaccination within, I think it was like 45 days, I don't know, something like that of your arrival to the country. There's definitely a time window that the rabies vaccination needs to be administered. Like I couldn't have just flown there with him and be like, oh yeah, he's good. He had it 3 years ago. No, it needs to be done within a certain time frame because he was not microchipped. So had he been microchipped, I think it would have probably been a little bit different, but they're still very strict about the timeline of when the microchip is done and the rabies vaccination, and it needs to be done in a certain order. Otherwise, it doesn't matter to them. You have to redo it. So he needed to have a Great Britain pet health certificate. It's a very bureaucratic document with very strict deadlines and timelines of when things needed to be done. So after I found a vet that does these pet health certificates, I had to get him microchipped. I think I did that in May, at the beginning of May or something like that, within this time frame that they wanted. And then we administered the rabies vaccination. So we got that. That was all good. And then the next step for getting Howard over there was the pet health certificate needed to be filled out and completed within 5 days of our plane leaving. The certificate needed to be signed by Howard's vet. And then the vet needed to physically send the document mail it to the Department of Agriculture in the United States to be stamped. It needed to have an official stamp, and then it needed to be mailed back to the vet so I could physically have the document before I left. So you guys, to give you like an understanding of this, all of this happening within 5 days, and I was in Nashville at the time, it needed to be sent to Florida. Like shipping and handling times alone is going to take up 2 to 3 of those days, right? Depending on when it is. And on top of that, the pet health certificate needing to be done within 5 days of our plane leaving, he needed to have a deworming medication administered within 72 hours of us landing. And that needed to be documented on the pet health certificate. My vet did not send the certificate within the 5 days. He sent it 72 hours before we left, because he didn't know that he could preemptively write down the medication and send it off before he actually did it. So you guys, my vet sent the pet health certificate. I think it was like on a Wednesday. I was leaving on Saturday, and they count it down to the hour. Mind you, I was paying for international phone calls to the department at the Edinburgh airport. And I wish I could remember the guy's name who I spoke to, because he was so helpful. I can't even remember how much money and time I spent calling the Edinburgh airport to make sure I was doing this in the right way. But yeah, 72 hours for the document to be sent to Florida, stamped, and sent back to me on a Wednesday. To say it was stressful is an understatement. Like, those 72 hours was probably one of the most stressful parts of this move, because like I said, I wasn't going without Howard. And on top of us needing the stamped pet health certificate to enter the country, you needed it to even get on the plane. It's not like you could just like rock up to the airport and be like, hey, I'm flying with my dog to Edinburgh, and the airline's like, okay, cool, get on the plane. No, you can't even register your pet to fly with you without that pet health certificate and without the clearance from the department in Edinburgh at the airport. You have to email that department in Edinburgh, send them the digital copy of your pet health certificate, and then they send a letter to the airport, to the airline, telling them, hey, it's okay. So many moving pieces. And I can't tell you how many times I was like, oh my God, fuck this. I can't do it. It's so stressful. Because on top of all of this needing to go off without a hitch, because of all of the interconnectedness of it, right? I couldn't even register Howard for the flight until the department in the Edinburgh airport emailed them and all of this stuff. And so luckily the guy I was speaking to, when I sent him the digital copy of the pet health certificate on that Wednesday, he was able to email the airline on that Thursday. So I got the approval, everything registered with the airline, which was great. And that was a huge relief that I got one big hurdle dealt with, but I was still waiting for the pet health certificate to come in the mail, because I had to have it before our flight took off, because the airlines, they check for the certificate. And if I would have landed in Edinburgh or in the UK without that document, which I would have never even been able to get on the plane, but if for some reason they would have let me, they would have sent me back, or they would have quarantined Howard. They could have quarantined him for up to 6 months, or depending on the individual who's processing them, they can just keep them while they administer whatever it is that they need to. But worst case scenario, they could have kept him for 6 months. So at the end of the day, we were looking at, if the pet health certificate doesn't arrive, we're not getting on the plane, which means all this work I went through was for nothing. So the Howard part was honestly probably one of the most stressful parts about the move, because it was all very time sensitive. And if one thing got messed up, we either weren't going, or like I said, Howard would be quarantined. So I can't tell you how many times I thought this wasn't going to happen. There were so many moving pieces that sometimes it felt fucking impossible. Sublease my flat, get Howard over there, find a place in Edinburgh to rent, get my stuff into storage. Where do I live from June 1st until July 3rd, which is when I was flying to Edinburgh? So many moving pieces. Not to mention the vet that I saw for Howard was in Nashville. So even if I went back to my hometown in Iowa, which I did end up doing, I still had to go back to Nashville before we left to get his pet health certificate, because there was definitely not enough time to have that shipped. So yeah, I put all my stuff into storage and said goodbye to my apartment. I got all that settled, and I also sold my car, because apparently at that time I was like, yeah, I'm going for 6 months, but I think I knew that I also wanted to try to like permanently move. Thinking back, I'm like, I probably should have just like chilled out and fucking kept my car. But I was like, where am I going to keep it? Like, where do I keep my car when I'm in Edinburgh for 6 months? I'll just sell it. Yep, that's what I did. So I had from June 1st to July 3rd to sell my car. I stayed with my friend for a little bit in Nashville, and then I did go back to my hometown in Iowa to see my family and friends before I left. And actually, it's crazy because while things seemed like they weren't going to work out at all, and they seemed so fucking difficult, they also worked out in the most unexpected but best way possible, because when I listed my car on Facebook Marketplace, someone inquired immediately, and it was a mom who was looking for her son because he was going to start school at the University of Iowa, which is where I went to college. It's where I started my first business, and he was going to business school there. So it was really like a, wow, this feels fucking meant to be. Like, I'm so glad I sold my car to this guy. Like, I sold it for less than what I was asking for it, but I was so glad to sell my car to this guy because I had it when I started my first business, and it's moved all over with me. Me, Howard, and my car, we moved to Colorado, Iowa City, my hometown, Nashville, just so many milestone moments in that car, different businesses I started, and it just really felt almost like full circle meant to be that this guy who was just starting his journey was going to get my car. So I told him like jokingly, hey, it should be a good luck charm. Like, I started my first business when I had this car, and I've been able to do a lot of amazing things. So I hope it brings you good luck, basically. So got the car sold. Okay, part of the moving process. And one of the last things in the moving process was finding a place in Edinburgh, which was also proving very, very difficult because renting is entirely different in Scotland. In the United States, a lot of cities have apartment complexes with leasing offices. You apply to the complex and that's it. In Edinburgh, nothing like that really exists here. It's mainly private landlords and rentals. They do have stuff called like full service apartments, but those are like incredibly expensive and they're more like a hotel. I think now there might be like one apartment complex in Edinburgh that is a building and has different apartments inside of said building, and a leasing office rents those out. That's like the only one that exists in Edinburgh. Everything else is private landlord rentals. And it's a very in-demand city to rent in. And there's also a housing shortage because of lots of reasons, but there's so many Airbnbs and tourist stuff that it leaves a housing shortage for the residents trying to find a place to live. So ultimately, after speaking to people in Facebook groups who have done this, who live there, I found a few people, like a few possible rentals. But at the end of the day, everyone said, just wait until I get there to find a place, because it would be impossible probably to secure a rental before I actually landed, because a lot of private landlords, they use property managers to manage their rentals. And so you have to apply with a property manager, and it's so competitive. So that was also a big hurdle. Eventually, I made the decision to book an Airbnb for 9 or 10 days. And after that, I had no housing secured. So my nervous system was like, what the fuck? That was obviously an underlying anxiety, knowing that I didn't have long-term housing secured before I left. Maybe it was a mix of being delusional and brave of why I was like, okay, cool, fuck it. Yeah, that's something we can deal with, because obviously I did. So that was my plan. Find a long-term place once I actually landed in Edinburgh. One thing to remember, that while I'm navigating all of this moving process and these obstacles that I need to overcome in order to actually leave the United States, I had still never flown before, ever. That piece is very much a large part of this story, because I was doing all of these things, still never having flown, and I'm about to get on a plane to fly to an entirely different country. There was so many damn unknowns in my life that I was walking into. And again, maybe some of you listening to this are like, what the fuck, Hayley? Like, why did you even do this? Maybe some of you thinking, what made you think you could do this? Why did you want to? It just sounds so hard. Yeah. And that's why, although the move process isn't a part of why I moved, I wanted to share this because it's just what comes with going after certain things. And obviously this is a unique situation, going to a different country. But when we go after different goals, you don't just like click your heels and boom, you have it. There's things that you have to overcome. There's times and instances where it does feel like, fuck, why the fuck am I even going after this? It would be so much safer and less stress and less hassle to just chill out doing what I'm doing. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with either decision or either direction you choose to go. If you want to sit out and chill because it feels too stressful right now, then that's where you're at. But if you're like, okay, nope, I've made my decision, I'm going to go after this thing, I'll do it however long it takes, whatever that process looks like, I'm down to go through it. Either way, it just depends on where you're at and what you're wanting to do And there's no right or wrong when it comes to this. If I would have ultimately ended up staying in Nashville because of the moving process, like that's just where I was, and that's okay. But looking back, when I hear myself telling the story, I am just like, God damn, I went through a lot of shit to get here. And as you've heard me share the move process, there were so many major obstacles that I had to overcome to make this happen. And it's why I love being a business coach and consultant and helping support business owners with their business goals, challenges, whatever, is because I love problem solving. So I guess to me, when I saw these obstacles, I was like, cool, these are problems I need to solve. Let's do it. And because I've done a lot of shit in my life that is like not the traditional path, I've just done so many different things in my life that I was like, okay, cool. I know I can be very creative with my problem solving. I know that it doesn't have to look one way just to get this problem solved or to overcome this thing. Like literally, the world is my oyster. I will come up with something. So I really think my ability to problem solve and thinking outside of the box, and also the evidence that I've done so much in my life already, I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Like I can do this. And you know what? It did all work out. And I truly believe that God was with me every step of the way. And I'm so grateful to all the people who made this happen. And that's one thing I want to talk about too, is like the village I had around me that helped make this possible was huge. And some of these people in my village were people I had never met in person. They were strangers to me. The guy at the airport who worked in that department who helped process pets, he was so helpful to me and he answered all of my questions. He did not have to go out of his way the way he did to help me do this, but he did. That guy was part of my village. There was a woman in a Facebook group that had flown her dog over, and she's the one who even told me about this pet health certificate. What she did, she gave me the breakdown of, hey, this is what you need to do. That woman was also part of my village. Like the vet that I had who was so willing to call the Department of Agriculture to see where the paperwork was at. There was just so many people in this story who God brought in to help me on my journey of doing this. Sometimes the support we get is from people that we already know, like our friends and family, or hiring business support, whatever it is. Like sometimes that's the obvious support that we know we have. But when we go and do different things or try to go after a goal, support can come in so many different ways. And when we try to think of how something will happen, we are limiting ourselves. Like as cheesy and annoying as this might sound, when we try to control how something's going to happen and control the outcome, we really limit ourselves because your village can grow and the support you get and the people that come into your life, if you're flexible with how the outcome actually happens, like God or the universe, whatever you want to call it, will put those people into your life to help you make it work. Shout out to all of the people who helped support me in making this happen. My friends, my family, people in Facebook groups, like the vet, all these people really went out of their way to help me. And I think that was a huge piece. And I really don't think I could have done it without them. And now, you guys, very briefly, I'm just going to talk about the actual move, the strategic part. And the plan was to fly from Sioux Falls, which is the nearest biggest airport to my hometown, to Nashville. So that way I could finish putting my stuff in storage, get Howard's pet health certificate from the vet, and then I was going to drive to Chicago for my flight to Edinburgh because I was flying direct from Chicago to Edinburgh. So Hayley at the time was like, oh, perfect. It'll be my first flight, a short flight, a good introductory. And I can't even begin to tell you how much I was also tested during that time period. Long story short, I was not let on my flight from Sioux Falls to Nashville with Howard because the person at the check-in counter did not mark him down as a service animal, which, like, side note, is the only reason I was able to fly with Howard in the cabin into the UK is because he was a registered service animal. I literally have a photo of Howard at the Sioux Falls airport. The woman was like, oh, they didn't register him as a service animal at the check-in desk, but you can pay to fly with him as a pet in the cabin from Sioux Falls to Nashville. But he needs to be in a bag. And I was like, well, I don't have a bag. And so I went to the gift shop and the woman there, she was so funny. She was like, she gave me this like little backpack. I have a photo of Howard. I tried to put him into it and he's just looking at me like, what the fuck am I doing in here? Anyways, that didn't work out. I did not get to fly to Nashville, which means I had to take a spontaneous road trip to Nashville with my grandma and Howard in a jam-packed car with the rest of the stuff that I was going to put in my storage. So, like I said, long story short, because that was a whole thing too, we made it to Nashville. I got my stuff in order. His certificate showed up at the very last minute. So my flight left on a Saturday, I'm pretty sure. And Howard's paperwork came in Friday afternoon. I think like late afternoon, but it showed up. I did forward the reservation team for United his certificate that I had in hand, even though they had the documentation from the department at the Edinburgh airport. I had seemingly all my ducks in a row. And then I also had to forward Howard's service animal documentation, which is the only way to fly a pet into the UK in the cabin. They have to be a registered service animal, which he has been for years. You cannot fly an ESA or anything like that. They're very strict about all of this. We had all that in order though. Things were finally starting to look up. I was like, okay, it hit me, it's happening. So I had to say goodbye to my grandma and my friends in Nashville, all of my belongings in my storage unit, and drive to Chicago. I left Nashville, late in the afternoon, maybe like 5. No, way later. Maybe like 7 or 8, because I didn't even get into Chicago until like 3 in the morning. And then my flight left the next day. I don't remember exactly. Anyways, Howard and I, we drove to Chicago from Nashville, and we got to the hotel. And the next day when I was driving to the airport, I was still so worried something else was going to go wrong that I don't think it had like fully hit me yet what I was doing. And I was still like nervous about flying a little bit and taking the car back to the rental drop-off station at the airport. I was by myself with Howard. I had one big suitcase that I was checking, and then I had one carry-on. But I was trying to manage like Howard with my suitcases. Never been in a big airport like this because I've never fucking flown before. And yeah, my nervous system at the time was like, I think it was a weird mix of like calm, but also like stressed the fuck out. But then after I dropped the car off to the rental station, I walk in the airport, I get to the United check-in desks, and they were empty. I was so worried that the person at the check-in desk was not going to let me take Howard or wouldn't get the documentation right again. And I go through the same thing I went through, but it all went so fucking smooth. The woman at the check-in counter was great. She had the documentation she needed. It was July 3rd, so I didn't know if the airport would be super busy because of July 4th, but literally no one was in front of me at check-in. Security was also a breeze, and I was chilling in the United Lounge within 30 minutes. Please remember, this is the first time I've flown in my entire life, and I was all by myself, okay? Just me and Howard. I was so nervous, especially the month before our trip. I'm pretty sure I would wake up in the night and just have like almost like panic attacks and nightmares, or just like really strong anxiety of, oh my God, I'm gonna fly. Like, I don't know if I can do this. But after I got checked in through security and was walking around in the airport to the lounge, and I got in the lounge, most of those feelings went away. Then I was like this weird, like calm, almost release. And you guys have heard me talk about all the shit I went through to even get to this point, that it makes sense that my body was just like, oof, we did it. Like, fuck. And like I said, I wanted to share this whole process with you because it's one thing to share why I wanted to move and the goal that I had, but it's another thing to show you a behind the scenes peek of what it actually took to make it happen and the things that come with it. But I remember sitting in the lounge, I think I was drinking a whiskey, eating the food that was there. Howard was next to me, and just feeling so proud of myself for doing it and persevering even when it felt impossible or very unlikely to even happen. And I'm not sharing any of this moving process part for any sympathy or for any acknowledgement, none of that, literally whatsoever. It's purely just to show you that wanting a goal and then going through the process, this is the real shit, like the behind the scenes of what that looked like. And it's so easy for me when someone asks me like, oh, why'd you move to the UK, to give them a quick answer. And it bypasses so much stuff and it oversimplifies this. And when you oversimplify it and you don't show the real fucking process, that people, when they try to go after the big goals themselves or changes, whatever it is, they're like, fuck, well, it wasn't as easy as XYZ made it seem. And I'm having all these struggles, but that girl didn't look like she did. So like, maybe I shouldn't do this. That's why I'm sharing the behind the scenes process, because I want you to know that whatever it is you're trying to do, it's a fucking process. And that process will look different for everyone. So really this episode is about the why and a little bit about the how, because that context and that information is necessary. And it would feel very wrong to leave that out. So yeah, I made it to the airport. I'm in the fucking lounge, sitting with Howard. Honestly, we were like living our best lives. Like it was open bar. so much food. And yeah, I flew for the very first time in my life with my dog Howard and 2 suitcases to Scotland all by myself. When I was standing in line waiting to board the plane, I saw someone wearing an Iowa Hawkeyes hat. And I was like, oh damn, what a small world. Iowa City is where I lived when I went to the University of Iowa and I started my first business. Then ironically, I get on the aircraft, I look at my seat number, and guess who was there in my row? Iowa Hawkeye hat guy. The guy and his wife, Allie, lived in Iowa City, like I said, which is where I went to college. And I felt like this was for sure a sign and full circle moment that the city where I started my first business that changed my life, like literally the reason I'm even on this fucking plane, the fact that a piece of that was there with me on that plane, on this journey with me, I really think it was God's way of saying like, yep, you're right where you're meant to be. The couple that I sat next to, they were so amazing. Allie was his wife's name. We still follow each other on Instagram, even to this day. And I know it would have been such a different experience if I wasn't sitting next to them. She loved Howard so much. And she asked me if she could hold him and cuddle him. She let him take up her foot space. I have so many photos of this as well. I'll try to add them to the blog post. But yeah, it was the perfect flight. Even if it wasn't my first flight, it would have been the perfect flight. But the fact that this was the very first flight I'd ever been on, it went perfect. And it's just such a special memory I have of me leaving the US in that way. And friends, that is the short story. And I know it felt long, but you guys, it's 2025. I left the US July 3rd, 2022. And it was a 2-year process for me to even leave. So this was a long story short of why and briefly how and the process I went to move to the UK. I am going to record a part 2 episode to talk about the transition, how I'm feeling now, like after I land, like the transition after I landed, how I'm feeling now after being here for 3 years, how I went from being a visitor to living here and the visa process. I'm going to do another episode all about that. But the story of why I moved to Scotland is so special. I wanted to do it justice by sharing all of the context because I think we get so used to seeing the highlight reel online that we forget about all of the real life shit that comes with going after the goals we have, trying new things, making changes. It is not always smooth sailing. And there are a lot of things that can make us question our decision or to make us not even want to try to go after the thing that we want. And I briefly want to talk about resiliency and what I did to keep going and not give up. Because friends, there were so many times I was tempted to give up. As you've heard me say, it seemed like there were too many obstacles that while some of them were separate things, they all still needed to come together to make it happen, like a domino effect. Without subleasing my flat, I would not be able to go to Edinburgh for 6 months. Without Howard's paperwork and all that in order, we weren't leaving, period. And having no long-term home in Scotland for 6 months, that's pretty self-explanatory. I would have had to go back to the US. So I don't have a big philosophical answer as to how I kept going and didn't give up. I think I've shared that with you throughout this episode, but truly I think it was God. I think it was my drive to make this happen, my support system that I talked about, and the evidence that I had from the previous times I've moved. All of the shit I've been through in my life, I was like, okay, Hayley, if you can do all that and make it through that, you can do this. There's that quote about having faith the size of a mustard seed. And some of the days before I moved and I left the US, I would say that's all I had. And other days, my faith was probably the size of an apple. But there was something in me that was like, okay, we're going to make this happen. I spent a lot of time talking to my friends, my grandma, my family. I cried. I panicked. I allowed myself to feel the fear and the reality of everything and also the excitement of it all. I just wanted to briefly touch on that. And while life and business look different for everyone, the same lessons apply here. Sometimes in business, the obstacles we face or the hurdles we encounter when trying to make our goals happen seem like they're too big of a hill to climb. That is why having a support system that helps you navigate these times is so important, and not trying to control how things happen, because that's really where the magic happens, is being like, I'm going to be open with however the fuck this actually works out and how it happens. And the real life shit is that sometimes things go better than expected. And sometimes things happen that are very unexpected. Some days it seems like everything is on track and the next day shit gets derailed. The ebbs and flows are normal. And even though it was quite challenging at the time to overcome the obstacles I faced when I was leaving the US, I am so glad I did. And in every business pivot, iteration, goal, or challenge I've been through, I can say the same, that it has always been worth it in the end. One very last takeaway I want to share is that more often than not, we don't just jump straight to the big goal that we have. There are usually smaller goals along the way that need to happen in order to achieve the big goal that we have. And this can be hard to accept, especially when we see the highlight reel posted online that makes us think it's normal to just jump from A to Z in the snap of the fingers, in a blink of an eye, right? But as you've heard me share in the story, that's not always how things look for people. And it doesn't mean you're a failure if you don't jump from A to Z. I wasn't a failure because I didn't move to Scotland in 2020 or 2021. In fact, had I have tried to move then and forced it, I know it would have been such a different experience, or it just wouldn't have happened, period. Who knows? But I still made my dream come true in 2022. And I do think that moving back to my hometown in 2020 and staying there until I moved to Nashville in 2021 and moving to Nashville, I know that was the foundational and supporting steps I needed to make my bigger goal of going to Scotland happen. It gave me the support and stability to achieve that goal the way I wanted to. Not just so I could say that I went to Scotland, woo, made it happen, cross it off my list, but so I could have the experience I desired. And that's exactly what happens in business as well. There is a huge difference between hitting a revenue milestone or a business goal by forcing it to happen from a place of desperation, just so you can say, I did it, versus hitting a business goal or revenue milestone because of the foundations you have in place and the smaller financial milestones and goals that you accomplished along the way. These are the stepping stones that will prepare you for that bigger revenue milestone, for the bigger goal, and allow you to be able to sustain it and enjoy the experience getting there and enjoy the experience when you get there. Whatever goals you have for your life and business, once you've reached them and essentially feel like you have it all, there is nothing wrong with wanting more. Accomplishing something you've wanted for a very long time and still having lingering thoughts of, oh, what about this? It isn't wrong. It doesn't mean you've made the wrong decision. And wanting more or something different does not make you greedy or ungrateful, because a business, home, relationship, life, whatever it is, if it's not fully supporting you or checking all of your boxes, those things are not something that you have to settle for, which is exactly why I partner with my clients to help them build a business that checks all of their boxes, because your business isn't just meant to support your clients and make money. It should support you and the life that you want to. So as I share this story with you, it makes me see how God and my intuition were guiding me every step of the way, even though sometimes I felt totally lost. And I can also see how the timing of everything was perfect. I truly believe I went to Scotland at the exact moment in my life that I was meant to. People ask me all the time why I moved to Scotland, and the answer really is because I wanted to. Simple as that. I think when people ask me this question, which they do often, they expect me to say, it's because of work, school, or love. And they're always so shocked when I say, it's just because I wanted to. I think it's hard for people to wrap their heads around this because we're so used to these rules and predetermined paths laid out by society. But nope, I moved to Scotland because I wanted to and I could. And now I'm curious. What are some of the goals or desires you have? Because this is your reminder that wanting to do something is reason enough. Maybe your bucket list goal isn't to move to a whole new country. Maybe you want to pivot your business, but you think you need to have some bigger reason to justify the decision. Or maybe you wanted to do XYZ, but you keep putting it off because you think you should just be grateful for what you have. Whatever it is, and whatever story you're telling yourself, you can say, actually, I'm going to go after that goal and do this new thing just because I want to. And that is reason enough. It doesn't make you ungrateful for what you have. You can be grateful for everything you currently have and still want more. I hope that sharing the story with you has shown you that it is possible to go after the big ass dreams that we have, whatever those may be for you. Make sure you stay tuned for part 2, which I will release in the near future. Every download, share, review, and rating does not go unnoticed. Your support for the show means a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Feel free to DM me on Instagram or send me a message on Facebook if you have any questions or thoughts that you want to share.